Hi, my name is Gaia, and today I will be completing my case presentation on the film Frozen, specifically talking about the main character that we all know as Elsa of Arendelle. The character that will be receiving a fictional diagnosis in my case study is Elsa. Elsa is the main character and the protagonist of the film Frozen. She's also the eldest daughter of the Queen and King of Arendelle, and later transitioned from being a perfect princess to a very, very, very complicated queen. This film was first released in 2013 when I was around the age of 8. And now, watching it as a 19-year-old girl, I can very much validly say that this film carries a much more complexity and depth than one would ever imagine. Although it is true that it is very optimistic and lighthearted from the outside, it does carry a lot of current issues that someone may not see when they first watch the film. Regarding the setting of Arendelle, it is definitely more of a Norwegian fictional town structure. It is very mountainous and is known for their cold winters as well as their beautiful springtime. But mainly in Frozen, we see that the film is takes place during winter. Elsa is like no other characters within Frozen. She's different. She has magical powers that allow her to control, form, and almost manipulate anything that has to do with ice, cold, and snow. Elsa had lived an innocent life, and she truly thought that she gave no harm to others until she realized that her powers were way out of her control. One day, she was trying just to innocently play with her little sister Anna in a palace room. They were trying to build a snowman, and then all of a sudden, she struck her little sister in the head with an icicle. This was crazy to Elsa because she had never had the intention to hurt her little sister. As she grew older and as she became queen, she became very much more embarrassed of her superpowers. And as the public found out about her superpowers, she began to isolate herself, causing her to leave the community she once wanted to leave so happily behind. She tried to accept her innocent powers, which were now very harsh struggles of hers. Further describing the film's culture and environment, it is definitely important to understand that just because Arendelle was a fictional town does not mean that it had no impact on her diagnosis at all. Arendelle was resembled from a Norwegian and almost Nordic culture. The community was very tight-knit, and the royalty resembled those of Scandinavian roots. Scandinavian roots consisted of high position of duty and power and control. The setting, as I said, although may not seem to have that much depth at first, actually really helps us understand the root cause of Elsa's diagnosis. The setting in film Frozen, being cold and isolating, can depict her true reflection of her internal feelings. Those being not only isolation, fear, inability to accept her powers, and self embarrassment. Additionally, transitioning from being a princess to a queen of Arendelle, Elsa was put under immense royalty pressure, forcing herself to try and be perfect in a situation where she knew she couldn't reach that expectation because she was just trying to figure out what her powers were. Her diagnosis is generalized anxiety disorder. Gathering information from Elsa's character and the actions that took place within the film Frozen, I can confidently say that she falls under the diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder. According to OpenStax 2020, GAD is, quote, characterized by a continuous state of excessive, uncontrollable, and pointless worry and apprehension, end quote. Thinking about the film's cultural context, whether that be Norwegian, Nordic, or Scandinavian, I believe that Arendelle's culture did highly impact Elsa's diagnosis of GAD. According to the National Library of Medicine, quote, a person's culture background influences the experience and expression of emotions, end quote. Previously mentioned, I said that Arendelle is influenced by Norwegian traditions and structured through Scandinavian roots. Yes, it was optimistic from the outside, but from the inside, it was much more complex. Elsa's culture was very strict on her performing perfectly, how she promoted her duty to others, how she portrayed herself. She was the public image of Arendelle, and what the citizens thought of her in return. She was made to be perfect, even though she was struggling internally. The opinions of others mattered. Elsa struggled to accept her diagnosis and also struggled to hold herself accountable to reach those high, long sought after expectations. No one around her decided to help her, they only allowed her to spiral. Everyone around her saw her powers as dangerous and tried to stay away from her. However, one group of people actually tried to help her, this group being trolls. As Elsa went on to hide in the mountains, the group of trolls that came later in the movie attempted to help Elsa by trying to make her aware and trying to make her aware of the powers that she had to potentially be able to control them. This sort of treatment was generally the only type of help that I personally thought that Elsa received within the film. Referencing the National Library of Medicine, the role of culture in Elsa's diagnosis can be related to, quote, ethnopsychology and contextual factors. Elsa's culture had her powers seen as not something to live with, but something to fear. This feeling that Elsa was also experiencing was not permitted within her culture. Contextual factors are, quote, determining the expression of anxiety disorders due to the social context and norms. In this case, being the societal norms and the royalty norms that Elsa had to, quote, follow and fit perfectly under. If Elsa went to a therapist during this time, a time of Arendelle, I believe that her diagnosis would completely be misunderstood. Magic was a powerful source in Arendelle and often used by many, but not to the extent of Elsa. From cultural context, her community followed traditional rules. It could be seen that her diagnosis may be something to do with magic, rather than a psychological complex disorder. Adding on, Elsa was queen. Her diagnosis could have been misdiagnosed into her not being equipped to rule. Ultimately, her being seen as a person who is unable to fit certain expectations to rule Arendelle. I believe that at that time, her diagnosis would, quote, be generalized and underlooked. It may seem that a person transitioning from being princess to queen may experience some sort of nervous symptoms because she wants to be perfect. However, these symptoms happened for a long amount of time, and it is definitely something that was controlled if received help. However, it was underlooked. And I definitely believe that her diagnosis would not be something extreme as generalized anxiety disorder. Considering culture broadly, I think the psychological disorder GAD is diagnosed in all cultures, but it's diagnosed in several different ways. It is very much difficult to perfectly consider how this diagnosis would be perceived or experienced in every culture because every culture is unique to oneself. According to the National Library of Medicine, quote, a direct comparison in prevalence rates between different cultures is difficult because of the difference in languages, assessment instruments, political, geographic, and socio-demographic context. Thus being said, these factors are dependent on how the disorder is diagnosed in every single different culture. Anxiety is common in every individual's lives, and in fact, quote, as a group, anxiety disorders are common. Approximately 25 to 30% of the US population meets the criteria for at least one anxiety disorder during their lifetime. That is much more than you think. Based on the DSM-5 in the United States and in more Western cultures, anxiety disorders are diagnosed often. It is seen as something, a commonality among people in society. Data and research shows that white Americans consistently endorse symptoms of social anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, and panic disorder more frequently than African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans. Some cultures may take this disorder very seriously, assuming that the patient may need very immense psychological and medical help. However, seen in more traditional cultures and relating it back to the movie Frozen, it may be underseen. The diagnosis in Frozen is seen as something that could be healed through quote magic, but is that reality? Instead of seeking help through medical treatment. In all generalized anxiety disorder, although generalized anxiety disorder is experienced throughout the world, it is diagnosed, seen, and experienced differently depending on the culture where the individual grew up from and where the individual currently surrounds himself. Here are some stigmas revolving around GAD in our Western culture. According to the American Psychiatric Association, stigmas in our current culture in American society can be associated with underestimating the risk and complexity that anxiety brings to a person who is controlled by it. These stigmas are not only experienced by the person who is experiencing anxiety, but to the people around them. Here are a few stigmas regarding GAD from the Generalized Anxiety Stigma Scale. Quote, most people think that an anxiety disorder is a sign of personal weakness. Most people think that people with an anxiety disorder should be ashamed of themselves. People with an anxiety disorder could snap out of it completely because it's fake. Most people think that people with an anxiety disorder are a danger to others. And I believe that that stigma is one stigma that was definitely seen throughout the movie Frozen. Here are two symptoms that Elsa experienced in the film. One is a moderate, excessive, and constant worry, and the second is being self conscious and ashamed of oneself. During the movie Frozen, Elsa is seen to constantly be worried about herself hurting others because of the powers that she has. This constant worry causes her to become isolated from others because she genuinely does not want to hurt anybody. She avoids anyone in her life and even cuts off contact with her best friend, Anna, and her sister. This symptom began when she accidentally hurt her little sister Anna when they were playing in the snow. They were both young, and that is especially what scared Elsa for the future. How at such a young age could she hurt somebody who she loved so dearly? As she grew older, her powers grew stronger, becoming more and more powerful. Because of this, she decided to go out and hide in the mountains for several years, being alone, because that is the only thing she thought she could do right. During the movie, when coronation came around and Elsa was appointed queen, Queen of Arendelle, she had presented herself to the fellow community that she was supposed to lead. The community she will lead with bravery and strength. However, the public at that time was not informed that Elsa obtained these magical powers until she accidentally turned her glove frozen. This was triggered by nervous symptoms because she was being presented in front of the audience that was judging her of how she was fit to be queen. Elsa was embarrassed and scared that the audience was going to fear her. Being said, because of this, Elsa guided her through her life with being scared of herself and ashamed of the risk that she not only posed to herself but to others around her. Additionally, a case study within the DSM-5 describing an individual diagnosed with GAD claims that he is, quote, embarrassed about how he has been feeling lately, that he is very reluctant to talk to anyone about his condition, end quote. This further validates that the symptom that Elsa was experiencing of feeling self-conscious and feeling ashamed of herself is a commonality in GAD. A symptom that was not shown. According to a case study that was discussed in the DSM-5, specifically Case Todd, irritability is a common shown symptom of generalized anxiety disorder. The case study explicitly says that in the case of Todd, a male individual who was later diagnosed with GAD claims that, quote, several of his co-workers had mentioned that he seems more irritable today, but he thinks this is probably a result of increasing fatigue, end quote. At no point in the movie was Elsa ever irritable. Elsa was too scared to show her true feelings, to show her frustration, her being upset, because then the people would fear her more. Elsa, throughout the movie, was a character that kept a lot to herself, hiding her emotions, bottling them up internally. Correlation of the symptoms toward diagnosis. According to the National Library of Medicine, being ashamed of oneself is a very common symptom in GAD, specifically stating, quote, only symptoms of social anxiety disorder and generalized anxiety disorder shared significant relations with shame proneness and guilt proneness, end quote. Although Elsa had powers that could hurt others, she truly pushed everyone away from her, not even allowing herself to experience daily activities and do stuff that would be seen as normal. According to research from the National Mental Health Institute, data states that, quote, people with GAD feel extremely worried or nervous more frequently about these things and other things, even when there's little or no reason to worry about them, end quote. Further showing that her excessive worry was a direct symptom of her diagnosis. Proposed treatment plan. The treatment plan in which I'm proposing to Elsa is called cognitive behavioral therapy, also known as CBT. According to the National Library of Medicine, the reason why CBT fits helping generalized anxiety disorder is because it, quote, allows us to better understand how the human mind is functioning because it is based on neuroscience and experimental and scientific psychology. This treatment is highly used by other psychologists and I believe will be a very effective treatment plan for Elsa. According to cognitive behavioral therapy in Los Angeles, CBT focuses on identifying and challenging the negative thought patterns and behaviors that contribute to anxiety. This is appropriate for Elsa because she struggles from understanding the root of her powers, what they actually are. This type of therapy will force her to identify her powers and not look at them in a negative way, but force her to view them in a more optimistic and hopeful way. Through this type of therapy, Elsa can also potentially regain self confidence, proving herself that she is not worthless. She should not fear her powers, but she should embrace them, because at the end of the day, she has royal power and she's the Queen of Arendelle. Although CBT does not require Elsa to take any medication and it does not affect her physically, that does not mean that there's no ethical concerns. Confidentiality plays a key concern when looking at Elsa's treatment plan. Elsa is Queen of Arendelle, meaning that she holds a high position of power and is publicly known by everybody. Her diagnosis and her treatment plan should be kept confidential. If the public is informed of this, then they will see her as a weak leader. They will not want her to lead their community because she will be seen as an unfit ruler. Adding on, there's the concern of Elsa not receiving the proper help because the people would only want to, quote, retrieve the goodness of the kingdom. The people who will be giving her help may rush the process. They wouldn't actually take the time Elsa needs to heal. They would just need her to get back and act as everything is totally fine so she can rule the kingdom. Essentially, they care more about how the royalty in the kingdom of Arendelle looks, rather than actually Elsa healing herself. Those are some ethical concerns to keep in mind. When Elsa is presented this treatment, there's a societal and cultural barrier that may hinder her receiving the proper treatment. This being her position in society, as I mentioned, being the Queen of Arendelle. When viewing royalty from an outsider's perspective, it is common to think that the person who is ruling the society cannot be struggling. They cannot be weak. However, if this is found out about Elsa, it is possible that the audience may fear her and also may see her as a weak person. It is possible that Elsa and her team behind her may not want her to receive any help or treatment because she doesn't want the audience to worry about her. She doesn't want to lose support. The worry that her being queen will be frowned upon once the public finds out is something that will be hard to get past. Thinking about how the generalized anxiety disorder is portrayed within the movie, I believe that it is an accurate portrayal of the disorder, but not the treatment. I believe that throughout the movie, Elsa acted in ways that are common to those diagnosed nowadays, whether that be trying to isolate herself or even being ashamed and self conscious about her. However, when looking at the treatment that Elsa received, in which some eyes people say that she did not receive any help, I believe that it is inaccurate. Her diagnosis was definitely generalized and almost viewed as something not serious. This is just because people did not understand what psychological disorders were back then, and especially in the situation in which she was in, where she was becoming queen, these symptoms could have been seen as normal and not even a disorder at all. However, when referring to the actual disorder in the film, I believe that the symptoms and how she acted, and also the times where she was alone and reflected to herself, were portrayed greatly of symptoms that were common with GAD even now. Thinking more broadly on how the portrayal of disorders in film influence our own understanding, I believe that this film specifically did a great job. Understanding psychological disorders is something very difficult because they are so complex and unique to each individual, as we learned before, cultures, demographics, language, politics even. Specifically in this movie, Frozen has an audience of younger children. However, the symptoms and actions that Elsa took part in were so simple for a young mind to understand as wrong. Although children may not understand what a disorder is, they could truly tell that Elsa was simply angry, sad, frustrated, and scared. Viewing the film now at an age where I have gone through a psychology class and done extensive research about disorders like general anxiety disorder, I've been able to further my understanding from the film. Here are my APA citations, and I hope that you enjoyed my case presentation regarding GAD in Frozen, specifically showcased by the character Elsa. Thank you.